The United States has ordered even more forces to the Middle East amid what looks like a growing war between Israel and Iran. Is this really a showdown between these two Middle Eastern nations? And is the U.S. in danger of becoming embroiled? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so Lloyd Austin has ordered U.S. forces to deploy to the Middle East, particularly a lot of carrier strike groups and U.S. Marines. Austin ordered the USS Abraham Lincoln and its attached destroyers to remain in the region. This is after they had been rerouted to the Middle East from what was planned to be a deployment to the Pacific. This is after the USS Harry Truman left port in Virginia and is headed for the Middle East. So again, this is usually how the U.S. military does its surge operations. It won't literally send a bunch of people there. Instead, what it'll do is it'll slow down the redeployment of forces and then have the scheduled deployment continue as normal, allowing for twice as many forces. This is how the surge in Iraq occurred, where troops scheduled to be redeployed home were actually extended by about 3 months in country as another surge of troops entered. So, but the question is why? And is there additional forces, right? The Pentagon announced that they're sending the USS Wasp, an amphibious assault ship, which includes a few other ships. But crucially, the Wasp, as an amphibious assault ship, has thousands of Marines and the ability to launch small boats as well as Marine-operated F-35Bs. And so what I find kind of interesting about this is that this is there's a couple of different ways one can interpret this. Now, to get the actual statements, which I think is important, the secretary, this is from the Pentagon. They've said, quote, the secretary has directed that the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group remain in CENTCOM theater and that the Wasp will continue to operate in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? This posture, complemented by the DoD's elevated fighter and attack squadron presence, including F-22s, 15Es, 16s, and A-10, further reinforce our defensive air support capabilities in the coming days. So they've got really one carrier sort of in the thick of it and one on standby in the Eastern Mediterranean, probably ready to sail and can be within striking distance of targets within the Middle East and even Iran in a matter of days or even hours. Now, one of the things they point out is that the Wasp and its Marine Expeditionary Unit are on standby supposedly for a non-combat civilian evacuation. We know that the situation in Lebanon is heating up a lot. Heating up is probably a euphemism. Is violent and extremely dangerous. And it's highly likely that U.S. citizens or dual citizens may find that they need to be evacuated from Lebanon in the event of further escalations of ground combat. Now, the question is why and what, right? Why is this escalating so much and what is the U.S. going to do about it? But of course, if you are interested in supporting what I do, you guys may notice that as I cover more and more of these issues, sponsors really don't want to touch it, right? Understandable. These are controversial issues, but because they're controversial, I think it's more important that I put out true factual information. So if you guys want to support me, you can do so at combatvetnews.com. This is my version of Patreon. Twice a week, I publish uncensored combat footage from the front lines, stuff like YouTube will not let me show you, but we also have weekly Q&As and even by-name shout-outs for different tiers. So check us out, combatvetnews.com. The link, as always, is in the description. And thanks to all you guys that do support us. So why is this happening and what is the U.S. doing? Well, the answer is that this has a lot to do with the Israeli actions in Lebanon. Now, Lebanon has this entity inside it. It's called a state. It's thought of as a state within a state called Hezbollah. Hezbollah operates in southern Lebanon. They are a military or quasi-military entity, but they're also a government, right? They operate clinics. They have elected leaders. Officially, according to the Lebanese government, Hezbollah is a political party, but they really carry a lot of weight. In southern Lebanon, they are the government. What that means is that they are bankrolled heavily by Iran, not by the Lebanese government. And so Hezbollah operates in a lot of ways as an Iranian proxy, and Iran is very, very mad. And so as a result, Hezbollah has been steadily escalating their actions further and further, right? It started with the Israeli invasion of Gaza, where you saw some Lebanese force or Hezbollah forces launching mortar strikes on Israeli military positions. But that's escalated and escalated, and now it's at a point where the Israelis feel that they need to resort to large-scale direct military action. And they've done so, right? Launching both those, I don't know what to call them, attacks. They blew up their pagers and they blew up their cell phones. And then now they are doing large-scale airstrikes, like very large-scale, targeting Hezbollah leadership. And this is, again, a common practice, a common strategy, rather, in both preparing for a battlefield engagement or also just simply a deterrent effect in its own right. Because you notice that those exploding pagers, right, damaged hands and eyesight. These are two things that if you're a regular Hezbollah fighter, that you need to have to operate, right? If you have an injured hand, you're not going to be able to operate like a weapon system. And if you have an injured eye, you're not going to be able to operate even like a drone. And so you also have them targeting the communications capabilities, right? Again, those beepers, those cell phones, those were communication devices in addition to sort of objects that marked fighters. So you've degraded communication networks, you've injured fighters and support personnel, and now they are in the phase where they're decapitating Hezbollah leadership. And that may be seen as sufficient, but nobody really knows. And the problem is that the U.S. wants to see these issues resolved diplomatically. Because again, Hamas, also an Iranian proxy, and in a speech at the UN yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu said, we are at war with Iran. These are all Iranian proxies. Iranian efforts have been targeting Israel. And, his argument, which I think is true, is that Iran isn't about defending the Muslim world or even cares about the Palestinians, right? Because again, if they really cared, they would take the Palestinians into their country. But that Iran actually cares about the imminent, effectively peace deal, the deal to recognize each other between Israel and Saudi Arabia, right? And Netanyahu argues that having two wealthy, industrialized, economically and militarily powerful countries align against Iran was a disaster for the Iranians. And as a result, that's why they encouraged Hamas to conduct their October 7th attacks, literally to stop this deal between the Israelis and Saudis from being announced. That's why they continue to try to polarize the Middle East, pushing a Muslims versus Jews narrative. Again, this isn't my way of saying it's right or wrong. I'm explaining to you how Iran is viewing the world, or how Netanyahu argues that Iran is viewing the world. And I think he's correct. It's actually, this was the first time I've heard an argument from the Israelis that isn't rooted in kind of, this is revenge for October 7th, period, full stop. Right, that these actors have more sophisticated motivations. But the U.S. is like, listen, we were near a diplomatic solution, and now you've taken the bait. The U.S. says, listen, Israel, you're behaving exactly the way that the Iranians want you to. They want you to become a persona non grata. They want you to be seen as the enemy of Muslims. And that means that the Saudi deal is way off the table. All right. And with the assassination, again, the Israeli assassination of Hezbollah leader and noted shitbag Hassan Nasrallah, it feels again like this escalation is going further and further. Right. And even Netanyahu seems to have said in his speech in the UN, he seems to have indicated that, listen, he says, listen, the Israelis, we believe that we're going to resolve these issues once and for all. We're going to decapitate these Iranian proxies. We're going to eliminate them, and we're going to further isolate Iran. The problem that the Pentagon says, Iran is not going to just let you cut off their arms, right? The arms or their tentacles in the form of Hezbollah and Hamas. And the Iranians, but the Iranians may want to see this conflict escalate even further. And so the U.S., it has to figure out how to not become involved in this, how to move all these forces towards a diplomatic solution, particularly given that the Israelis have said, we have no interest in one. We are planning on wiping the map of all Iranians, of all Iranian proxies. But it's not clear the Israelis have the capacity to do that. Again, they're fighting in Gaza. They now have to fight in Lebanon. And the Americans have said, listen, the best we can hope to do is deter these folks, right? And that's where we're at. The U.S. is trying to have two entities. First, it wants deterrence, and it wants to move these forces in here to say, listen, if you try something, Iran, we have a lot of options available to us that include, battalions of Marines, that include dozens of highly capable fifth-generation fighters. We can absolutely deter aggression if you choose to pursue it, particularly against U.S. forces, who you might recall are currently stationed in places like Syria and in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. So we want the deterrent and we want the flexibility to make these choices. Because again, if you don't have any fighters and you don't have any Marines and you don't have any strike capabilities in the region, then you only have diplomacy as a possible option, and your opponents know that, right? Whereas if you have a range of military capabilities, which is what kind of the Marine amphibious group is meant to be, it's meant to say, listen, if you want us to evacuate civilians, the WASP carrier group can do that. They're not carrier group, whatever, amphibious group, whatever they call it. They go, well, the WASP can do that. Oh, yeah, and we can stage limited sort of defensive operations. We can actually go on shore and establish a forward operating base. We can strike deep targets with our F-35Bs. We can range deep into enemy territory and hit military targets. So we have a whole host of capabilities, and that's just the amphibious carrier group, right? We also have, again, a proper carrier strike group that has even deeper capabilities. So we have a lot of choices available to us. Does it mean that war is imminent? Well, one, war is already here between Israel, the Palestinians, Israel, and the Lebanese. The fear is that, are we big enough to act as a deterrent? And the answer is, I hope. We all hope so. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you so much to our Colonel tier members, James Gerling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knutson, Bastian Himmerling, Brian Kelly, Dale McCombs, James Ola, and Henry Roussier. I couldn't do this without you guys, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. Tomorrow, a new video on Combat Vet News is dropping, so I hope you'll join us, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.